Hello, I'm Neville Goddard. Just kidding. Well, guys, holy shit. I'm in the car and I feel like I've been in the car talking about Neville Goddard for a while. If you don't know who I am, you should probably turn off this video right now because we're about to go deep in a way that nobody else that I know of on YouTube. I wish other people on YouTube would do what we're about to do. In a way that's going to actually explain to you Neville Goddard's teachings in a different historical context, and also talk a little bit about the AI Neville phenomenon that's going on right now. This might have to be a couple videos. Maybe we'll be able to fit it just into one. I'm going to ramble some today. I haven't rambled in the car in a while. If you don't know who I am, my name is Tim Grimes. I have written and edited 12 books on some of Neville's best teachings over the years. I've also made over 200 videos on Neville's teachings, as well as several podcast episodes on Neville's teachings, and was briefly the moderator of the Neville subreddit. In short, I've probably forgotten more about Neville than most people will ever know. And yet, I would say what makes what I'm talking about in this video and in many of the videos, which will be linked below, where I've spoken about Neville before, what makes it different is that it's grounded in a lot of practical, everyday, psychological advice you can actually integrate into your life. That's what makes my ideas different than virtually anybody else you will see on YouTube who consistently talks about Neville, with maybe one or two exceptions. So I'm just gonna start talking, just like in the old days, and see where it takes us. What I want to start with is that obviously AI is changing everything. Okay, that goes without saying. We've made several videos about that. And what's interesting is that many people who are getting into Neville in the last year or two are actually, they hear Neville's name or whatever, but then literally their initial exposure and their exposure to Neville is through AI Neville lectures where it's not actually even him. And this is obviously unfortunate. It's also kind of comical given how insane the Neville community is, but it is wild. If you find out about Neville in 2026 and go on YouTube for more information or to hear his lectures, there's a very good chance, even if you're an intelligent person, that you're going to end up listening to Neville AI lectures and stuff that he never said whatsoever. And again, this is obviously unfortunate, but it underscores a point I often make, which is if you do want to, investigate these kind of law of assumption type of theories that Neville talks about and so many of the brilliant ideas that he shares, social media is not the place to do it, generally speaking. His original books are much better. Some of the few critical commentaries written on him, some of my stuff, Israel Regardie's essay, for instance, on Neville, you will probably find very helpful. There's other intelligent essays on Neville that you can find online if you look for them. That stuff is going to give you a lot more accurate information and give you a better sense of the man and his teachings than any of the drivel on YouTube. Generally speaking, again, I keep on saying generally speaking because, there are exceptions here. What I really want to talk to you about here, though, is something that I've said for a long time that people don't understand. And that is Neville's best lectures, in my opinion, if you want to use them practically to change your life, to feel better on the inside in order to change your outward reality, so to speak. His best lectures for that stuff, in my opinion, unquestionably, are from the 1940s and early 1950s. However, most of the real lectures, not the AI lectures, the real lectures of Neville that are on YouTube are from the late 50s, 1960s, and early 70s, just because of recording technology, and they recorded a lot more of his lectures then than in the 40s and 50s. Now, Neville had his promise experience, I believe, in 1959. And for those of you that don't know what the promise is, you can read The Law of the Promise. He talks about the promise in the end of that book. It was a religious spiritual experience he had that vastly, vastly, vastly changed his teachings. Vastly changed his teachings. And this is what people don't get because they don't understand the historical context of Neville. And again, this is why reading about Neville a little bit from some historically accurate sources is very helpful instead of just cruising YouTube. What I'm getting at is even the lectures that are real on YouTube from Neville, primarily from the 1960s, are not nearly as helpful as his earlier stuff. His earlier lectures, usually, unfortunately, you will not be able to hear them in his real voice. But there are many good audiobook versions. And now, with the beauty of AI, there's going to be recordings of his stuff with a wonderful Neville AI voice that's going to sound just like him. If it already isn't already there, it's going to be coming very soon, where you're going to be able to hear all his lectures from the 1940s and 50s in his voice. 5 lessons, which were just 5 lectures he gave in 1948, is probably the go-to place for most of you guys watching this video. If you want to understand what Neville's philosophy is and parse it down and get it in a practical manner quickly, just check out 5 lessons. I'll put a playlist below specifically to many videos I've done on 5 lessons on that book. 90% of the information that Neville shares on a practical level is explained probably most succinctly and best in 5 lessons. That's all you need. You don't need to be scouring all these AI videos or incredibly confusing promise videos from the 1960s. Neville's most practical information, generally speaking, was given in the 1940s and early 50s and was most succinctly shared in 5 lessons from 1948. And to kind of further prove, or not to prove, but to give an example of, how wild the 1960s shit got. And there's a lot of brilliant stuff in Neville's 1960s Neville lectures. Don't get me wrong. He was still a wonderful speaker. It's so much more confusing. And so much of the stuff that originally he seemed to take figuratively, he then started to take literally after the promise. But to give you an example, I'm going to read an excerpt from this memoir called, I don't know if you can see it here. I'm going to put a link in the description for this too. Grace is Enough by Willie Ames and Malo Upton Ames. I don't know if I'm pronouncing their last name right. These were child actors in the 60s and 70s. And Malo's mom, I believe this is Malo. Her mom was super into Neville. And she talks about her mom and kind of the Neville community in this book in an incredibly negative light. And she intentionally does not refer to him as Neville because she says that his followers are very critical and don't like it when anybody speaks bad about Neville, which is just about like today. So she calls him Godfrey in this book. And just for those of you who are skeptical and be like, well, maybe it's not Neville, it's Neville, guys. Okay? You don't have to believe me, but it's Neville. She calls him Godfrey. All right? But let me see if I can find this excerpt for us. And I just lost the page, so maybe I can't even. Rambling Tim Carr video here. Here we go. And there's also, I'll try to find, there's a Reddit, like the Neville Reddit, Neville Critic subreddit thing. They have all the excerpts from the book where Neville's mentioned. I'll try to find that link and put that in the description as well. So this section of the book is called Imagining Food Doesn't Make It Real. And she writes, my mom and Grandma Peggy and sometimes some other people would come home from the meetings, the Neville meetings, and sit at the kitchen table talking about Godfrey, a.k.a. Neville, who they said was Jesus come back. The confusing thing to me was that they said they were Jesus too. I didn't understand what they meant. Now, let me give you some context here, okay? Neville, Godfrey, as he said here, after the promise experience, he started talking about more about, how we're the conception of Jesus. And this is incredibly confusing, and it's dramatically different in terms of practical application, as I said, than his earlier teachings. If you read 5 Lessons and then you read some of the stuff he was saying in the 1960s, he seems like a completely different teacher. And I just do not understand why more people do not pick up on this, which is why I'm making this rambling car video, so more folks do understand. Malo here, she writes in a little footnote. She says, I should clarify their teaching. They thought Godfrey, aka Neville, was Jesus, and yet so were they. Again, they thought Godfrey was Jesus, and yet so were they. Godfrey thought he was especially appointed by God at birth to impart what he called the promise, and that the promise had been fulfilled in him. See why people would think of him as a modern Jesus? He taught the use of imaginative power as a means to see one's dreams come true. According to his teaching, even this special power, my mother's imagining, will pass. At death, you'll enter through a door and be restored to life in a world just like our own. In the meantime, you'll have the same problems you had before and will not lose your identity. The process will keep happening until Christ is formed in us. However, you are only born once through a woman and once from above. There is no hell or damnation, for we are God, and God cannot condemn himself. It's a confusing set of beliefs, even if a person is not suffering from delusions, as my mother undoubtedly was. Whoa, shit. Just that footnote is enough for you to see how fucking insane post-promise Neville often was. Because what she's talking about there, yeah, that's post-promise Neville. And again, this stuff is generally not there especially in the 1940s lectures. It's far out stuff, but it's very practical, particularly 5 Lessons. We get to post-59, post-promise Neville, and it's fucking wild. I'm going to read just a little bit more, because this is where it gets from kind of wild to very disturbing. Malo, she writes, my mother was obsessed with Godfrey's teachings, aka Neville's teachings. After John, who I believe was her mother's boyfriend, picked up his metal lunchbox in the morning and left for work, Mom lay on the couch for hours. She listened to tape recordings of Godfrey over and over as she went into that trance that she called imagining. Mom was having visions again, too. She would pop up suddenly with her teased hair standing straight up and flat in the back and say, oh, wow, I saw a man, but he had no face, and I knew it was Godfrey, a.k.a. Neville. In her visions, she and Godfrey had sex. Weird, out-of-this-world sex, or so she told me. My mother talked openly and in great detail about sex to me. She was often nude or wore little baby doll see-through nighties around the house. She had raised me with the belief that sex was what got you the man, and the man is what you need to pay the bills. Somehow I understood, though, that sex with Godfrey was not about paying the bills, while sex with John was. Mom told me that she saw balls of fire around the room. She described being transported to some other world, where she would see battles in the sky and golden chariots with spikes on them coming out of the clouds. Malo, imagining creates reality, she told me. She said I could lie on the couch as she did and dream up what I needed, and it would come. But her beliefs were not just positive thinking. She would tell me that everything created came from her mind, and that her mind was the same as Godfrey's mind, the same as God's mind. As a 10-year-old girl, I sensed this new fixation was more than just being religious, but I didn't know what it was. Her words scared me. She would tell me that she had powers, that she was getting stronger, and that she could hurt people with her powers, that she could use her dreams to hurt them. She had seances, and she and a friend regularly used the Ouija board for guidance about what to do next. Eventually, the house became more and more of a mess. Nothing got done. She was into nothing but Godfrey. John would come home from work, and his wife, I guess it wasn't his wife, so it was his wife, not his girl. No, John was John was her mother's husband. John would come home from work, and his wife would pop up off the couch for the first time all day. She had obviously not taken a bath, combed her hair, or even washed her face. Oh, John, I just had the most incredible vision. There were rats running all over my feet and big balls of fire floating in each corner of the living room. John would stand in the middle of the room, seemingly struck dumb. How can a person carry on a conversation with someone who is talking of imaginary rodents and fireballs in the room? So he would just ask, "What's for dinner?" He'd put on a country music album and lie on the couch to rest and listen to music. Mother would amble into the kitchen to find something to eat. The inside of our refrigerator always had some old something or other that had turned into green fuzzy mold on the top shelf that squished in your finger if you tried to pick it up. There was always a puddle of sticky orange goo that had dripped from something. And in the vegetable bin were limp, drippy, rotting vegetables. Not many possibilities in there for dinner. I always wondered why, if she could create things from her imagination, we never had anything to eat. So that's from Grace is Enough by Willie Ames and Malo Upton Ames. That was Malo talking about some of her childhood experiences with her mother, who was a student of Neville's, aka Godfrey, in that book. That excerpt speaks for itself. And that, my friends, is why if you get into Neville and want to apply it practically, you should use common sense. Why you should probably look at 5 lessons in some of his earlier books and not listen to the lectures from later years. I still love Neville, but buyer beware. Buyer beware. And it's very important to take what you like from any teacher, including obviously what I'm talking about here, and take what you like from it and not become dogmatic or delusional, because the results are pretty clear, like they were shown there, what happens when you do become delusional or fanatical about the so-called law, let alone the promise. If you have questions, let me know. Again, some of those helpful links are in the description.